through us and out into the world. And then we talked about principle number 2, I am, the nature of what it means to be human, us as an expression of the divine, inherently good, original blessing instead of original sin. So today, principle number 3, I create. We read it as human beings create their experiences by the activity of their thinking. Everything in the manifest realm has its beginning in thought. Another way you might see it written is we are co-creators with God, creating reality through thoughts held in mind. So this is a teaching in unity that we call the law of mind action. A fun little way to remember it that rhymes. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. Has anybody ever heard that before? Yeah. So when we talk about principle number 1 and principle number 2, the nature of God is all good as the creative force behind everything. And we are a manifestation of that good. So that means that we inherently are creative beings. So to be creative doesn't just mean being an artist, being a great singer, being a poet, being a musician, being a writer. We are creating every day of our lives just by living. We are creative beings. Don Miguel Ruiz, the author of The 4 Agreements, says it this way: life is nothing but a dream. And if you create your life with love, your dream becomes a masterpiece of art. So we are born into this limitless possibility. We are constrained only by our own consciousness and perhaps influenced by the consciousness of those around us. So if I believe that I am lazy, not very smart, and not really capable of accomplishing anything, what type of life am I creating for myself? Yeah. And if I believe that I am resilient and that I'm witty and that I'm charming and that I'm resourceful, what type of life am I creating then? So we know this already, right? We can already see that things begin in our consciousness, that the beliefs we hold about ourselves, our capabilities, our very nature influence what our life looks like. What also influence our life are the beliefs that we hold about the nature of the universe and how it works. Let me give you an example. If I believe and I'm thinking thoughts like everyone is out to get me, or things never work out for me, or I barely make enough to get by, compared to I create harmony in myself and my surroundings. Things are always working out for me. All things work together for good. And I am abundantly blessed and always have all that I need. That's a shift, right? In Proverbs 23:7, it says, "For as one thinks within oneself, so one is." So what you focus on expands. Are you focused on lack and limitation, all the things that are going wrong, that aren't working out the way you wanted? Or are you focused on abundance, joy, and gratitude, all the things that are going right and can go right? Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, says the mind of humankind is like a stream that flows from some lofty mountain. It has nothing at its point of origin to corrupt or distort it. But as it flows into the plane of experience, it meets the obstruction of doubt and fear. And it is here that dams are built. So the mind of humankind, flowing from some lofty mountain, our connection with divine mind, with all that is pure and clear. But as we go through this human experience, do we ever get a little fearful? Do we ever get a little doubtful? Do we ever have experiences that make us question the goodness of God. So Charles Fillmore says that this doubt and this fear creates a dam, and that dams create stagnant water, these swampy places where things can fester and there's flies and undesirable things, right? So we recognize when we've created a dam by how it shows up in our life, when we have those messy, smelly things that show up. So the solution to fixing that in our outer life is to focus on removing the dams we have built in consciousness, the blocks that we have created in our minds from fear, doubt, and worry. Principle number 3 is essentially saying that life is lived from the inside out, that my outer world is a reflection of my inner, which means if I want to fix something out there, where do I start? Right in here. So how do we do that? How do we start clearing out these blocks in our consciousness and creating the life that we want to see through the power of our thoughts? So one way is affirmations. Lowell Fillmore, who was the eldest son of Charles and Myrtle, the co-founders of Unity, says the power of affirmations help organize the scattered powers of the mind and direct them into one channel. Anyone ever have a scattered mind? Yeah? So when it comes to things like affirmations and doing our work in consciousness, the words don't matter quite as much as the feeling and the intention that we put into them. Ellen Davenport, who we talked about last week, she's a Unity minister and author and is the head of all Unity publishing right now. She has a great book on the 5 principles, and in it she says this: the universe does not speak English. I love that. The universe does not speak English. It operates as a field of energy, principle number 1, and so do we, principle number 2. Imagine yourself as a tuning fork. Your feelings in any given moment set up a vibrational tone, and the universe picks up the tone and hums along, amplifying your sound. It's a nice way to imagine it. It is a little scary. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because my next bullet point here says that the universe, God, all that is, spirit, whatever word you want to give to that, it's going to sound a little strange, is agnostic. What I mean by that is that it doesn't matter if you would label your vibration good or bad, it amplifies it just the same. That whatever you give it, it amplifies, just like a mirror will reflect whatever you put in front of it. That's the importance of choosing our thoughts, doesn't it? So the power of our creative mind allows us to see or visualize in our mind's eye what we want, to affirm it in words, and to feel that what we desire is already true. Because somewhere out there, the realm of infinite possibilities, it is already true. And it is our consciousness, the power of thought held in mind, thought and feeling held in mind, that allows us to grab a hold of that possibility and make it real. Should we talk about quantum physics again? Yeah. So quantum physics tells us that we live in a world of limitless possibilities, that an infinite number of realities are all occurring simultaneously right now, and that it is consciousness that solidifies the infinite number of what ifs into what is. That's power of consciousness. Does anyone have nightmares? Sometimes, right? So isn't it interesting? You can have a nightmare and it's so scary. You might wake up upright in bed, palms sweaty, heart beating fast, maybe even gasping, right? And then once that initial fear passes, do you ever think, well, that's my own, like I just made myself, right? So I have lucid dreams. Lucid dreaming is when you are aware that you're dreaming and can sometimes control it. Has anyone had that experience before? It's super fun, right? Okay, so I had one a couple weeks ago. And by the way, I know that dreams are nowhere near as interesting when you're telling them out loud as they are to you. So don't worry, I'm not going into here. But I had a lucid dream a couple weeks ago where there was another person there and we were having a conversation. And I knew that I was dreaming, right? So at some point in this conversation, I said, isn't this whole thing silly? I'm basically having a conversation with myself. Reply is, yeah, but what does that matter? And that with me because, yeah, what does it matter that this is all just happening in my own head, right? Think about it. How often do we replay situations from the past over and over again in our minds? We make up a whole story about how maybe we make up a whole story about how things should have gone if they went according to our plan. Maybe we're holding on to this idea that they hurt us, that they did something wrong. If only one thing had have turned out different, life would be so much different now. It's over and done with. It's all in the past. The only place that that story is being kept alive is in your own mind. And yet the effects of it are real, aren't they? The pain that you create for yourself, that you hold on to by replaying those stories, affects you right now. But that event's over and done with. Your mind is keeping that alive. When we read a book, we create entire worlds in our mind. We develop emotional attachments to the characters, right? They don't exist anywhere but in our own head. Sure, they're words on a page, but we're the ones who create them with the power of our minds. And when we worry about what the future brings, about what's going to happen, we are creating scenarios in our own minds that can impact our digestive system, speed up our heartbeat, cause cortisol to flow through our body, real physical changes that we create in our body from some made up scenario in our heads. So your mind's powerful, isn't it? So why not use that power for good? I think a lot of what happens in our lives, or at least the way we see and interpret the things that happen in our lives, has to do a lot with mindset. I have this in my notes, and then my dad shows up to church today, so now I'm feeling weird about it, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. So, you know how sometimes there's like lucky people and unlucky people? Like there's people who everything always seems to work out for them, and there's people who, things never seem to work out for them. So my dad would say, the harder I work, the luckier I get. So I think it has a lot to do with mindset. So we're going to talk more about affirmations and how to use the power of our creative thought to manifest our reality again and again in the upcoming weeks, because principle number 3 is my favorite. But I have to stay on time. So I'm going to leave you with this thought from Ellen Davenport, the author of the 5 Principles. She's not the one who originally wrote them, but she has a book called The 5 Principles. She says, we are the ones deciding what shows up in our lives through our focus, our thoughts, our words, and our allowing. So that's principle number 3, I create. Let's talk about principle number 4, I pray. Through prayer and meditation, we align our heart-mind with God. Prayer is creative thinking that heightens the connection with God-mind and therefore brings forth wisdom, healing, prosperity, and everything good. So principle number 4 talks about the tools that we are able to use, the power of prayer and the power of meditation. Paul Hasselback, a Unity minister and a teacher at the school for a long time, says the time we devote to prayer is an investment in our process of attaining spiritual mastery and enlightenment. Consistently setting aside portions of our day for prayer provides the opportunity to experience healing at the deepest, most satisfying level of our lives. So I'll be honest, when I first went into ministerial school, I was a little annoyed at all of the prayer classes I had to take. But I learned a lot about prayer in those classes, and specifically the way that Unity teaches prayer. One of my instructors is a minister out on the East Coast, and we became good friends. And we were talking one day about what makes Unity different from other Christian denominations, other spiritual paths. And one thing he said was, you know what I think we really got right? So I think we really got prayer right, that we've really got it figured out in Unity. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about Unity's method of prayer. It's called affirmative prayer. So it's similar to affirmations, but just how we talked about that the feeling behind the words of an affirmation is just as important as the words, if not more. In affirmative prayer, it's less about the words and it's more about taking the time to enter into the consciousness of oneness. So in Unity, we say that we are not praying to God, because remember principle number 1, God is not the Santa Claus God, right? God dwells within and flows through us. So we are not praying to God, but from the consciousness of God, from the consciousness of oneness. So in affirmative prayer, we're not asking God to do something or change something or give us something, right? Because back to principle number 1, God doesn't pick and choose winners and losers, right? In affirmative prayer, we are taking time to know, to realize, to claim what is already true from a spiritual perspective. So prayer doesn't change God. God is unchanging. Prayer changes us. It opens us up and allows us to receive that which is already ours. By remembering that we are expressions of the divine, spiritual beings in human form, one with source and all that is. We are unlimited. And all that God is, every aspect of the goodness of God, is available to us right here and right now. That is the consciousness of affirmative prayer, that realization of that. Eric Butterworth, another one of my favorites, beloved Unity minister, he wrote in his book, The Universe is Calling, I love this, prayer is self-revelation, self-expansion. Prayer is getting centered within and re-establishing ourselves in the flow of the infinite creative process. Prayer is about changing us, not about begging or pleading God to do something for us, but taking the time in consciousness to recognize the oneness that we already are. So Unity does have a whole 5-step prayer process. Don't you love to have notes before you go into something really spiritual, right? But it's one of those things that once you practice it enough in their process, it becomes ingrained, it becomes embodied, right? So this could be a whole class, but I'm going to just really briefly walk through the steps so you can get an idea of how Unity teaches the power of prayer. The first step is to relax. It's always a nice place to start. So that's when we close our eyes and we focus on our breath and we allow our monkey mind, that mind that just goes and grabs onto every little thought and wants to follow it and chase it all over and writes your to-do list while you're sitting here in church and what did I leave the stove on? And whoa, what about that one thing that person said? So you take time to relax, let that monkey mind slow down. The second step is concentration or setting your intention. This is another tool to help with the monkey mind, honestly, because when you give your mind something simple and short to focus on, it helps all those other thoughts kind of disappear. So in step 2, you would form a mental image or come up with some words like an affirmation or an I am statement, and that becomes like your mantra. So you just repeat it or see it in your mind's eye as often as you need to keep your mind focused on it. And then the third step is meditation. So meditation as a step in prayer, who knew? So in meditation, we rest in the silence. Now that our body is relaxed, we have been able to calm it down by focusing on that statement, that intention. Now in meditation, we're able to let it all go. And we sit in meditation, and that's like the time where we hear that small, still voice, where we hear those whispers, or we feel that nudge, or something just clicks. You ever had that happen before? Where some issue or problem that you were struggling with, and then you stop thinking about it, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that earlier? In Unity, we call that realization, and that's step 4. A deep knowing, an inner conviction of the truth that is your intention of prayer. That feeling where it just clicks and you know. Reverend Paul Hasselbeck says, persist in prayer, persist until realization is achieved. That aha, that illumination, that yes, I've got it. Persist in prayer until there is a deep inner knowing, a deep conviction of truth. And then stop thinking about it or even looking for a manifestation. This realization, this deep conviction of truth is answered prayer. When you sit with an intention of recognizing, of knowing, of feeling that I am a spiritual being, and you sit with that in meditation, can you imagine what it would feel like when that one clicks? When you know at the core of your being that that is true, when it stops being just an intellectual idea and it becomes a full body yes. That is the point of prayer in Unity. That is affirmative prayer. So our last step is thanksgiving or gratitude. It's the last of the 5-step prayer process. I've got a lot of 5s, I guess. 5-step prayer, 5 principles. All right, so this last step is giving thanks in advance. Even if your intention has something to do with something in the outer world, we start with the inner work in prayer. So we want an abundance of money. We start with the inner work of prayer. I am prosperous and abundant. Feel that realization after we take it into meditation, and then we give thanks in advance. Even if we don't see it on the outside yet, because you won't, because you were just praying, we give thanks. So it's an expression of faith. Giving thanks in advance is an expression of faith, it's a statement of your assuredness of answered prayer. Reverend May Rowland says, as you pray, you generate the spiritual energy that renews and heals you in mind, body, and soul. So give thanks for that. So prayer is a time to practice developing our spiritual powers, to get in alignment with the truth of our being, and to practice seeing things from the perspective of oneness, from the perspective of goodness. And everything in life takes practice, right? Any musicians in the room? I know we've got a few. Anyone play piano? So learning piano was my COVID project. I'm not great still, but I can play some songs. So that's nice. If you play an instrument, have you ever worked on a song so hard, and when you're working on it, you're thinking through like every single note, and it doesn't sound good at all, right? But you have to really think through it. And especially on piano, it's like you're doing the right hand and you've got to really think through, okay, that's when the left hand hits. That's when, right? And you're drilling it. It's a lot of work, right? And then one day, after doing that for days and days and days and days, you sit at the piano and it's like your brain turns off and you don't have to think about it, and your hands just do what they're supposed to do, and it sounds beautiful. That is the power of practice. And prayer is no different. So devoting that time to prayer, that's why prayer stands alone as a 4th principle, because the time we devote to prayer is an investment. And imagine that yummy feeling, like when your fingers finally know what to do on the piano, or all the other times you've experienced that feeling in your life where you work so hard and then all of a sudden it's easy. Imagine that in prayer. That's why we practice it, even when our mind won't shut off, even when it's hard, even when we don't want to. That's why we practice prayer. All right, last principle, principle number 5. God is, I am, I create, I pray, I live. Principle 5 says it is not enough to understand these spiritual teachings. We must live the truth that we know. I apply these principles in all areas of my life, incorporating them into my thoughts, my words, and my actions. So here's how we use principle number 5. Any situation in your life that's causing you a little bit of grief, that you wish were a little bit different. Anybody have a problem in their life right now? Just a couple of us? Okay, all right. Well, for the few of us that have problems, let's talk about how we do this. So principle number 5 says we live the truth that we know. So you take that problem, that situation, that challenge. Let's just say, for sake of example, it's things aren't going the way you'd like in a relationship in your life. Maybe with a child or with a spouse or with a boss or a coworker, something's not going right. So we work through all 4 principles before we take action in principle number 5. So principle number 1, God is. How is God showing up in a situation, this relationship challenge? Can I see God in this? The first principle says there is one presence and one power, active. There is no opposing force of evil. Am I trying to make evil in this situation? Principle number 2, we are divine beings. Do I see the divine in this other person? Am I expressing as my Christ self in my relationship and my interactions with this person? Principle number 3, I create. What thoughts have I been holding on to that are contributing to the dis-ease in this relationship? Am I turning this person into a villain? What thoughts could I hold on to that might make a difference in this situation, in this relationship? Principle number 4, have I prayed on this situation? Have I lovingly taken this person into my meditation and seen and held the highest and best for them? And then principle number 5, now that I've done that work, I know what I need to do. Let's move now into our meditation. Take a moment to breathe, to consciously relax your body. Let those shoulders drop. Let your hips relax. Let your hands fall open. And hold on to a thought. A thought that you think might be true, that you want to be true, but maybe you're not quite sure. Could be, I am a child of God. I am the light of the world. Money flows easily to me. My relationships are all in harmony. I am living my purpose. Find your own unique statement, the statement that you most need to know is true right now. See it, see the words, hear them repeated in your mind. Make a mental image of a place that represents it, or hear a song or a tune that gives you that feeling of that statement that you need to be true right now. Hold on to it as we settle for a few moments in silence. Take a nice, slow, deep inhale. And just sigh as you let it out. And know that through the creative power of your mind, it is true. From the very nature of that desire being planted in your heart, it is already yours. So give thanks. You can whisper thank you out loud. Think of specific gratitudes in your head and just conjure up that feeling when you are truly appreciative, when you've experienced that in your life. Feel that in your body right now. I give thanks because it is done, and so it is. Amen.